The following video is an analysis of the television programme Garth Marenghi's Darkplace and its associated other projects. Footage from that programme will be used in order to illustrate parts of said analysis and will also be presented for critical dissection. This video will also spoil the entirety of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, though it is a 6-episode British comedy series with loose continuity, so watching spoilers wouldn't be the end of the world. This is... But that's beside the point. Still, if you care about such things, then you are advised to skip this video. If you have seen Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, or simply don't care about spoilers, Darkplace is a short comedy series from the 2000s British comedy renaissance. This is a period I intend to talk a lot about on this channel, because it holds a number of hidden gems, alongside a number of abjectly abysmal junk like... It was a different time. I was in high school, so fat suits and blacking up were seen as exciting, naughty thrills for myself and my fellow teens, and not embarrassing or offensive. In fact, the offence was often part of the fun. I don't hate Little Britain and its ilk because of its offensive content. I hate it because the jokes are just yelling a catchphrase or doing a sex.
David Thomas, you bloody fool! You could have had a bit of cock there!
I have standards now. Darkplace has scenes like this. See? Much more nuanced. But the louder and grosser programmes seem to be drowning out the more subtle and interesting examples of comedy this time period gives us. Darkplace is one of the good ones, perhaps even the most well-realised of its kind due to its sheer dedication to the bit. To find out why Darkplace is such an important piece of the comedy landscape even today, we must pull back its layers. So let's start at its outer shell. This is Rick Douglas, MD. This is Garth Marenghi. And this is Matthew Holness. Pay attention, these distinctions are important, there will be a test. By modern eyes, in a world of postmodern poisoning and shows within shows, Darkplace may seem oddly quaint. It's a parody of 70s and 80s supernatural horror series, but instead of directly pulling from a single source to mock, Darkplace pulls from several places, such as Twin Peaks and Ed Wood. There's no episode of the show where you can directly put your finger on what's being taken the piss out of. For example, the show's final episode, The Creeping Moss from the Shores of Shoggoth, pays lip service to Lovecraft, but it has more in common with 60s Star Trek episodes where Kirk falls in love with a woman painted in Dulux green, but can't be with her because, oh no, her species can't touch a human penis without exploding or something. Don't worry about it, I'm sure it's just an allegory for race relations. But then, in Darkplace, the footage of that suspenseful final scene of Shores of Shoggoth turns out to have been lost, and all of a sudden we're parodying the telesnap reconstructions of lost 60s Doctor Who episodes. This is, in my opinion, the only way to watch lost classic Doctor Who. I will be dead and buried before I recognise anime Reign of Terror. Darkplace doesn't follow an overall plotline. It can't for reasons that will become apparent soon. But if this was made today, I can guarantee there'd be subplots and maybe even a cryptic arc like all those vaguely creepy modern projects that feel compelled to staple them onto themselves. Instead, we get individual cases of the week at Darkplace Hospital, where we follow our hero, Doctor of Everything and Warlock, Rick Douglas. And he also shoots guns, which is an important part of his job, I swear. Well, you know, demons and evil spirits really overestimate themselves against a trusty shooter. You know, I reckon The Exorcist would have been over a lot quicker if Father Karras pulled out a 9mm and blew Reagan's head off. You can't vomit blood without an head, can you? I'm sorry, I don't know what just came over me. Let's just get back to it. Assisting Rick in his duties is boisterous lover man Lucien Sanchez.
He's a good buddy, though we sometimes have punch-ups.
Yes, that is Matt Berry, and this is the role that pretty much made him the overly theatrical attractive guy with a deep British voice. Though here, that's literally what he's supposed to be, it's not just his default state. There's also Liz Asher. She's the woman. You know, the woman. She does the woman things, like scream and be moody. Oh, and psychic powers. You know, standard woman stuff. Am I right, fellas? No, seriously, am I right? What are women? I've never met one. Sitting at the top spot under the never-seen and mysterious wonton is Hospital Administrator Thornton Reed, played by Richard Ayoade in a role that will appear distinctly alien to anyone who knows him from stuff like the IT Crowd. He raps in this. It's fire, there's nothing else to say.
She's smooth, like ice, cold to the touch, and it isn't very nice when you're left alone. You let you treat you bad, leaves you hang on the phone, take off. Shove your loving on the wheels, put the pedal to the floor, cause you're heading for the hills, gotta get away, can't take it no more. Man, you don't need this, leave her at the door.
Together, these four must fight demons, aliens, monkey men, and the Scottish, all while trying to do vaguely defined hospital things. Rick is often seen in the children's ward being an all-around good guy,
Never take drugs.
but the closest we get to seeing actual surgery is Sanchez stepping out of the operating theatre in scrubs for 3 seconds. In modern parlance, we could consider this the British equivalent of a black tank top film, an unrestrained power fantasy created by a man with too much money. Except here, we don't have too much money. We barely have any money. The strings on these spatulas were always going to be visible. Maybe they'll airbrush them out for the 4K re-release in 2047. There's certainly some great prop work on display, and the little model they use for the hospital is exceptionally charming, especially when they fire up the smoke machine for Scotch Mist and Shores of Sugar. But everything has this feeling of being made in someone's garage, because reportedly, it was. There's a lot of intricate attention given to make sure that Darkplace is as shitty as possible. Camera shots are angled in such blatantly terrible ways. The best example of this being when the camera is set up to take in the entirety of gangly Wheatley actor Stephen Merchant, but then it's not lowered again when it's turned towards the other actors in the scene. This means that for most of the scene, a good head of clearance is shot above the actors' heads, either because the crew didn't notice, or they weren't paid enough to notice. It's the kind of screw-ups that either have to happen entirely organically, or have to be planned out meticulously. There's Thornton's teleporting spade/coffee cup. The extras are incapable of emotion. Sanchez does all the emotions at once.
So what happened between you and this Renwick customer?
If you've ever had experience with the BBC or Channel 4's shoestring budgets, you've seen these mistakes hundreds of times before. It's very hard to get intentionally bad to work. Audiences can smell inauthenticity a mile off. It's why most Indiegogo and Patreons set up to produce sequels to cult 80s B-movies are always doomed to fail. Self-awareness is often the enemy of comedy. A great avenue for comedy can be somebody who's truly clueless about the consequences of their actions. And it's often quite hard to get a real person to think that Blagor the alien warlord will be their King Lear. So if you can't get that, you set up a proxy. You may have noticed by now, but this show isn't just called Darkplace. Who is Garth Marenghi? Well, he's the writer of Darkplace. He also plays Rick Douglas. It's not a black tank top, but it's a black dress shirt with a rather fetching purple tie. Garth is a horror novelist, clearly a parody himself, and while the links to the millions of paperbacks churned out by the cocaine in control of Stephen King may seem obvious, it actually seems that Garth is punning to a greater extent on Stephen King's imitators. Due to Mr. King's success in the 70s, 80s and 90s, any half-wit with a functioning pair of hands and an agent thought they could become the next great horror novelist. Horror paperbacks with short, single-word titles like Stabber or Blood Feast enjoyed significant popularity before the internet. While of course there are some standouts in the genre, the glut of these works is truly remarkable, and anyone who's had a relative who's an avid reader has probably seen covers very similar to these on bookshelves even if the owner doesn't like horror. They're cheap, easy to write, sensationalist and non-taxing. In a world before best gore, its absence was felt, and nature abhors a vacuum. Garth himself is clearly modelled on the author pictures in these such novels. A self-serious man, probably holding a pentagram or a skull, a master of terror, a baron of blood, the maître d' at the buffet of the tormented and the damned. At least that's what his publisher calls him. If I had to single out an individual that Garth was punning on, it would probably be cult English horror author Guy N. Smith. Guy's book covers are almost a direct match for Marenghi's. Garth Marenghi. Guy's book covers are almost a direct match for Marenghi's, and Smith also is known for his Crab series, which Marenghi seemed to have a direct parody of. Smith himself was certainly a character. He supported pipe smoking, he supported gun shooting, he was a writer of children's books and softcore porn, he even novelised some Disney films. Personally though, Guy N. Smith seems more like a quaint eccentric, whereas Garth is an insufferable nuisance with far grander ambitions than Guy ever had, and stands as more of a composite than a one-to-one parody. Darkplace then represents what happens when this composite man tries to expand outside of the novel, with Garth being a cipher, an individual focusing point, a culmination of the worst traits this kind of writer can have. Garth's chief sin is his arrogance. He thinks he's the greatest writer that's ever lived, all while proudly boasting,
I'm one of the few people you'll meet who've written more books than they've read.
Nothing is ever his fault. Everyone is either conspiring against him or vainly trying to appease him, and the audience doesn't know what's good for it. The Darkplace we get to see isn't just a show that was made in the 80s, it's an attempted remastering of it in the 2000s, with linking narration by Garth and interviews with anyone who
Didn't die or offend me.
It's in these interviews that we get to see Dean Lerner, the actor for Thornton Reed and Garth's publisher. Dean is particularly sleazy and is seemingly involved in some illegal activities behind the scenes like gentlemen's clubs. It brings to mind real-life skeezy impresarios like Victor Lowndes or Lloyd Kaufman. Dean, most of the time, seems to have bought into the ego of Garth Marenghi, but there's a subtle undercurrent in his interviews that maybe the production of Darkplace and the financing of Garth novels is actually more of a front for his shady dealings, which could even include sex trafficking and maybe even murder. The only actor Garth and Dean could get to talk about Darkplace after Darkplace is Todd Rivers, who played Sanchez. The only other significant actor was Madeleine Wool, who plays Liz, and she's played by British comedy veteran Alice Lowe. Oof, my brain. Oi, you in the back there. Pay attention, this stroke isn't for my benefit, you know. Alice Lowe is perhaps most recognisable to modern audiences for her role in Black Mirror Bandersnatch, but she pops up a lot in this time period of British comedy, and her best role is in 2012's comedy horror film The Sightseers. Are you keeping up? I know everybody's got like 3 names going on at the moment, but, you know, I think you're bright enough to figure it out. Is all this information settling in? Good. Madeleine, the character in Darkplace, is, by the 2000s, dead, and no one seems to know how it happened. Well, nobody's telling us how it happened.
I reckon she's probably somewhere in the Eastern Bloc. That's my hunch.
Do you think she's still alive then?
No, I think she's probably just buried in the Eastern Bloc.
This leaves us with just Todd, who's clearly a parody of the Shakespearean actor types who wind up in genre horror or science fiction, then burn out with drink and drugs and start bad-mouthing the industry. Todd really makes you realise just how out-of-pocket people like William Shatner and Tom Baker are. Sure, you are Kirk and the Doctor forever, but dear God, it's better than being Lucien Sanchez, and television history is filled with far more Lucien Sanchez's. And it's the dichotomy between the 1980s characters and the 2000s actor characters that really makes Darkplace have that special, place. It's able to skewer both the 1980s and the 2000s in one fell swoop, with only 6 short episodes. But perhaps it can do more. Perhaps there's more meat on this bone. It's the 2000s. Video is out, man. There's a whole new technology with special features and commentaries called the DVD. Or maybe a better name for it would be, The DVD version of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is an art piece unto itself. Sure, it's not flashy. It's not a big cube of 400 episodes. It's a simple, humble, 1-disc plastic case. Sometimes greatness doesn't come with glossies and postcards and actor stills and whatever. Sometimes greatness comes in cheap plastic. There's a joke about prophylactics in there, but I'm too classy to make it. Prophylactics means condoms, doesn't it? Not the other one? Right, yeah. Prophylactics. The DVD is entirely in-universe. Bar tiny little references to the actors' real identities, this DVD is supposed to be from the world where Darkplace was really made in the 1980s, not mocked up in the 2000s. They even got the DVD logo replaced with a Dean VD logo, suggesting that these official Channel 4 DVDs are actually made in Dean Lerner's shed. This is, quite frankly, an overwhelming victory for physical media. You can't replicate this on streaming or even TV. Few ever really put this much effort in, and when they do, we've got to highlight it and appreciate it. The DVD itself is just brimming with the coolest shit. We get extended interview segments with these characters, where we get to learn more about the unhinged madness of the creation of Darkplace the series, alongside some unsolicited elaboration on the internal lives of these individuals. There's also a full version of One Track Lover, a song written by Matt Berry. Anyone who knows Matt from stuff like Snuffbox and Toast of London knows he's a genuinely talented musician, and One Track Lover, while clearly parodying schmaltzy 80s rock ballads, is an actual hit. I guarantee the next time you're in your car, you'll be playing it on repeat, imagining yourself bombing down the motorway in a muscle car with those funny little doors that open the wrong way. Also, oddly for a DVD of this era, there's only a single deleted scene, but it's a really rather interesting one when it's taken as part of the whole deal. It's a scene from Scotch Mist and features Rick having a flashback about why he hates the Scottish. It depicts an event where he attempts to patronise a Scottish chip shop and experiences culture shock. I'm showing clips of it now, and you can see there's something off about this scene compared to all the other scenes from Darkplace the series. If you look carefully and have a little knowledge of British clothing of this era, then you'll know that these t-shirts are far too modern. Yes, this shot hasn't had the 80s film grain overlay put over it yet, but the chip shop still looks far too 2000s for something that's supposed to be from the 1980s. This scene was replaced with Rick just telling Sanchez, Liz and Thornton about his experience because it would have broken the illusion. As much as Darkplace has its matte city backgrounds and breakneck bicycle chases, they may not be believable, but they are believable in the world of Darkplace. But a 2000s chippy is a step too far. That's the commitment the creators behind Darkplace had to ensuring this world held together. They knew breaking that mystique, even for a second, could jeopardize the entire premise of the series. I personally find it fascinating that the conceit of an entire series was balanced on excising a single non-important scene. I believe that the inclusion of this segment in Scotch Mist would have fundamentally changed the brain feel of the entire programme, perhaps undercutting it permanently. But Darkplace's creators don't let such things detract from the whole. In fact, where they can, they add to it. There's full DVD commentary of all 6 episodes, and it's all in character by Garth, Dean and Todd. In-character DVD commentary was nothing new when the DVD was released. This is Spinal Tap did the same thing in 2004, but there's something special about Darkplace's take on the concept. Again, the stringent adherence to kayfabe is kept up throughout. This is Garth Marenghi, Dean Lerner and Todd Rivers, not Matthew Holness, Richard Ayoade and Matt Berry. It also links back to the Dean v. D thing.
You're not having a can, are you, Tom? Hang on.
The characters are unprofessional, crumpling cans of beer and eating toffees while they talk over banal scenes. In-universe, Dean hasn't coughed up for a recording studio, so they're on his couch trying in vain to remind Todd of memories long lost to booze. It's honestly really impressive. This DVD, disregarding the other extras and a few little Easter eggs that don't break the illusion, literally doubles the amount of Darkplace content with the commentary alone. This commitment to building this world is incredible for a 6-episode series. I'm actually glad a second series wasn't made. The longer the main series goes on for, the harder it is not to let something slip. Brevity here is important in maintaining that tight structure. Sometimes things aren't supposed to go on forever despite their quality. This all being said, this wasn't the first time or the last time we got to sit down with these characters. Darkplace was followed up with another in-universe Channel 4 programme, Man to Man with Dean Lerner. The conceit is simple. It's a parody chat show hosted by Ayoade's Dean Lerner, with guests all played by Matthew Holness, with our first being Guess Who. We get even more backstory about Garth Marenghi and Dean Lerner, but it's all mostly consistent with what we're told in the Darkplace interviews. But Man to Man doesn't just stick to Garth and Dean shenanigans. The other guests are new characters, and they all have their own idiosyncrasies, but sometimes the individual being parodied is far more on the nose than the vaguer efforts of Darkplace. Glyn Nimron is mostly Leonard Nimoy. Amit Chanan is Uri Geller passed through Simon Garfunkel. And even Garth himself wears his influences on his sleeves more, being far more reminiscent of Harlan Ellison than his Darkplace incarnation. This all being said, Man to Man is a fun coda for Darkplace, if not as effective. I do appreciate the twist at the end though. Feels like a natural progression from how Darkplace treated Madeline Wall. But television hasn't been Garth Marenghi's only domain. In fact, the character comes from the stage. Before Darkplace, 2 plays known as Fright Night and Neverhead came out in 2000 and 2001 respectively. The show features Ayoade and Alice Lowe, but sadly appears to have not been recorded, bar some small snippets of Neverhead used in promotional material. By what we can see of Neverhead, the material is very similar to what would eventually be used in the Darkplace interviews, and it's fun to see that, even at this point, Matthew and Richard were playing the characters off stage. These characters had been worked on and refined in the crucible of live performance, so it's no wonder they pop up in Darkplace seemingly fully formed. These characters easily feel like they have lives of their own outside of the screen, perhaps more than their luminaries like Alan Partridge or the Mighty Boosh, which only comes from the development and grounding that has been done at several stages of their creation. After Man to Man, Garth mostly disappeared, as did his actor and writer Matthew Holness. Holness would pop up in bit parts here and there, but he would never reach the heights of his peers, which I always view as a crying shame. There are many comedians who came from the 2000s that really squandered their talents on panel shows, and Holness has a very particular style that doesn't translate to such programs. But Garth Marenghi didn't die. In 2022, 16 years after Man to Man, Garth Marenghi released a book. An actual, real, proper book. Teratome is real. You can buy it and read it now, and it was followed, in typical Marenghi fashion, by Incarcerat, and will be followed by This Bursted Earth, both of which follow the style you'd expect of a tawdry hack horror paperback. Marenghi is still parodying that style because it never went away. Books like these, often cast aside into Oxfam shops or your granddad's bedside cabinet, still permeate the modern cultural world. and arrogant, conceited writers who think they're the greatest thing to the written word since Shakespeare realised people will pay to see stabbings every night out of sheer intrigue still haunt all forms of artistic expression. Garth has stayed relevant, while the subject he was taking the piss out of hasn't, because his parody is of a kind of person, not a person in particular. Their methods might be different, but you all know creators like Garth Marenghi. Matthew Holness is currently doing book tours / stand-up shows to promote his books in character, and it's like 20 years haven't passed. You yourself may not have picked up a paperback lately, but Garth Marenghi is still here. While culture remains a product, while freedom of expression equals freedom to expose yourself, while human nature craves acceptance and applause, Garth Marenghi will still be here. And if you take the wrong steps in life, Garth Marenghi could be you. Matthew Holness has really built this great mirror of a certain type of person. Art is supposed to express something about the world and the people in it, and it can do that even with green-painted women and gags about monkey men pissing. Matthew is a great artist, and I know I made it sound like his period between Man to Man and his books was a big arid bank of nothingness, but that's not true. In 2018, Matthew Holness wrote and directed Possum, a feature film that is anything but a comedy. It's dark, genuinely horrifying and distinctly cerebral, playing off Sigmund Freud's ideas about the uncanny valley, and not just in a mannequin head is creepy kind of way. But of course, mannequin head is really, really creepy. Ugh. I'd like to think the lessons he learned making Darkplace played a part in the creation of Possum, but the truth is it's more likely the appreciation and knowledge of the works that made Darkplace such a cutting parody have also had the side effects of making its creator well versed in the history of classical horror films. Possum is grisly and deals with subject matters far more depressing and serious than man gets stabbed with knife, so watch it at your own risk, but I highly recommend it. All that aside, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace has earned its, place as the influential comedy it's spoken about in hushed tones. There's a reason it was one of the first shows on Adult Swim. That intelligent style parody format has been copied to varying success across its programming block. That commitment to detail in aid of strengthening the ties to what it's parodying can be seen in shows like The Venture Brothers. The well-built comedy character developed over time can be seen in the likes of Dr. Steve Brule. And there's a hospital in it, so, like, Children's Hospital is ripping it off or something, I don't know. I've only watched Xavier Renegade Angel.
You slumber, a cucumber!
I miss characters like Garth, where the effort put in to make a real, credible maniac goes above and beyond the call of duty. Comedy is dependent on exaggeration, and sometimes the flaws in something only become apparent if you stretch it all the way you can. The danger is if you stretch it too far and you break it, leaving you with broken tropes and snide, self-conscious arrogance just as bad as the arrogance that created the original work. Darkplace balances that line perfectly, making the hyper-self-awareness part of the gag before modern comedy started desperately trying to cling to the ironic dollar. By going backwards, Darkplace looked forwards. Perhaps in that way it set a bad precedence. Doomed like all quality art to be aped by future productions that don't understand its central conceit, taking its superficial traits and its critical eye and wallowing in cynicism only to... Wait. Oh. Fuck, it's all one big circle. I'm trapped in a time loop. Get me out. Get me out. It's happening again!
Well, I'm a man who makes love. Now he's knocking at the front. On a hot summer night. Now he's knocking at the back. In a town called love. Now he's knocking at both doors. Well, alright.
Horror paperbacks, only 3 slips of laudanum. Try my latest work, The Romulan the Eight Trantis Free. It's spookier than the entire Cardassian occupation of Bajor.